Us too. But that's all right.
Four is off. Okay. This has to be a tiny bit smaller. There we go. You know what? That's a really good idea. Oh, no, I'll go grab it. Are we okay to start? Are we okay?
Believe so.
All right. At this point, we're going to call to order the meeting of the Richfield Housing and Redevelopment Authority. It's July 16th. It's 7:08 p.m. Our first order of business is approval of the minutes of the regular Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting of June 18th, 2018.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or are there any clarifications? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the minutes. Now, our next item is approval of the agenda, and I have been told by staff that item 4 is going to be pulled off, so we will not be doing item 4. Is there a motion to approve the remainder of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion or questions? All right, all in favor of approving the agenda with the deletion of item 4, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, we've approved the agenda. Next, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Mr. Devich?
Thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. For those here in the audience and those at home, the consent calendar contains separate items which are acted upon by the HRA in one motion. Once the consent calendar has been approved, the individual items and their recommended actions will also have been approved and require no further action. Tonight, there are only 2 items on the consent calendar. Item A, consideration of the adoption of a resolution amending the funding source for an interfund loan approved by the Housing and Redevelopment Authority, resolution number 1175 on January 22nd, 2014, and resolution number 1223 on February 16th, 2016, for the 2004-1 Tax Increment Financing District, which is the former city garage site. Item B is consideration of the adoption of a resolution consenting to the inclusion of certain Housing and Redevelopment Authority property by NHH Properties, DBA NHH Companies, LLC, with respect to land use approvals and a petition to vacate portions of 64th Street adjacent to the Housing and Redevelopment Authority property. And that concludes tonight's consent calendar.
I'll move the consent calendar.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. Are there any items for discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the consent calendar, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the consent calendar. Okay, that brings us to item 5 on the agenda, which is a public hearing and consideration of the adoption of a resolution authorizing the sale of 7324 Girard Avenue to Aaron and Ashley Buchanan and the approval of a contract for private development with Aaron and Ashley Buchanan for the construction of a single-family home through the Richfield Rediscovered program. Mr. Devich.
Thank you again, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. I'm turning this item directly over to Kate Aitchison, and she'll make the presentation to the HRA.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. Ashley and Aaron Buchanan, the buyers, are current Richfield residents who are applying to purchase the lot at 7324 Girard Avenue from the HRA for the construction of a single-family home. The buyers are working with Beyond Contracting, Inc. to construct the home. The new home will be a 2-story home with 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a finished basement, and a 2-car attached garage. The new home will be approximately 3,000 finished square feet with a minimum end value of $375,000. We have the home buyer here, Ashley Buchanan, as well as Brittany Farrell, who is with the building company, Beyond Contracting. and they or myself can answer any questions.
All right, do we have any questions from commissioners before we open the public hearing? All right, since this is a public hearing, is there anyone in the audience that would like to comment? If so, please state your name and address and write it down on the sheet, and you'll have 3 minutes. All right, sir, the microphone's right over there.
Hello, my name is Art Felgate, and I live across the street, 7329 Girard Avenue South. So obviously I'm here just to see what's happening. Kate may have answered my question late this afternoon. My one concern really was the property had been valued at pretty close to $200,000 very recently. And in fact, from my own perspective, I recently challenged my tax assessment on my home, which is also relatively about the same value. The county tax assessor came out to my house, looked around and said, Art, you can't get any house for less than $200,000 in Ridgefield, which I think was a little bit of a surprise to me, but so be it. So I was a little concerned when I saw the value that this house had sold to the city for of only $120,000. I understand there was some structural damage. I understand there was some substandard housing issues, but that seems like a pretty large depreciation from what a very recent valuation of it was. I also have no problem with an incentive of offering a reduction on that property value to the buyers because they're going to take on the responsibility of demolishing and removing all the old material. I'm wondering if someone may elaborate a little bit more about how that almost $80,000 difference in the price of the property came about, because it does affect someone like me who's living right across the street with a property that's valued about the same. And if it is really going to be valued that much less, then I don't want to pay taxes on a $200,000 property. Thank you, and I'll listen.
Right. Did you want to go ahead and respond to that before we take any more speakers?
You know, every situation is unique. I would say that. You know, when a buyer sells to us, they are not hiring a real estate agency, which takes 6% off the top. So there's a 6% savings to them, which really results in a reduction to us. There's the foundation problems that were mentioned, that if the seller were to list it and go through the point of sale inspection process, they would have to bring that up to code. And so there would obviously be costs associated with that. I believe, and Kate can correct me if I'm wrong, the seller was from out of the area. No, but it was a relative that ended up with the property. And there's some value to just not having to, for lack of a better way of saying it, there's some value to not having to mess around with putting a property on the market, have open houses, go through that process. For whatever reason, the seller felt that they could live with $120,000.
All right, thank you. Are there any other people that would like to speak at the public hearing?
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Are there any questions from commissioners? If not, then it would be in order to have a motion to close the public hearing.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
All right, All in favor of closing the public hearing, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, well, thank you to the public for your comments. Do we have any other questions for staff? All right, then at this point, we need to take action. So,
I would move to adopt a resolution authorizing the sale of 7324 Girard Avenue to Aaron and Ashley Buchanan, and to authorize execution of a contract for private development between the Housing and Redevelopment Authority and Aaron and Ashley Buchanan for the redevelopment of 7324 Girard Avenue, contingent upon final Housing and Redevelopment Authority attorney review.
Second.
all right, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion, Commissioner Bruce Daniels?
Yes, I would just like to say I agree with the gentleman who came up and spoke, which is why I voted against when we bought this in the first place a couple of months ago. I think we should allow the fair market to take care of this, to buy it, and so I will be voting against this. Not the fact that it's not a beautiful home, and we're happy to have you, but to stay consistent with my vote that I don't believe we should have bought this.
All right, thank you. I also had a question. It talks about contingent upon attorney review. Are we planning to have a lot of changes, or?
No, we were just tying up some loose ends. The buyer and builder will be handling the demolition part of the deconstruction and new construction, and so we are folding that into our contract, and we're just trying to make sure we had a final version, and we do, as of today.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Commissioner Sandal?
Thank you. One of the things that I appreciate about the program that this is falling under is the Richfield Rediscovered program provides brand new housing in a community that's fully built, because we don't have a lot of vacant lots. And wherever we can tear down substandard housing and replace it with new housing that meets current needs, what you will find is that the neighbors take a look at this wonderful new house on their block and say, oh, maybe I should do something to my house. I'm no longer the most expensive house on the block. He is, or she is. And so it does make a difference. It does encourage neighbors to improve their property, and I think it's a fairly reasonable investment over the long haul to improve Richfield.
Right.
So I'm supportive.
Are there any other comments? All right, so we have a motion before us to adopt the resolution authorizing the sale and execute the contract for private development. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
All right, thank you. We've adopted the resolution and authorized the contract for private development. Moving on to item 6, which is consideration of the approval of program guidelines for the first-time home buyer down payment assistance program. Mr. Devich?
Again, thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. With this program, I'm going to turn this over to Kate Aitchison, and she's going to make the presentation to the HRA.
Thank you, chairs and commissioners. In response to recent discussions about maintaining affordable homeownership opportunities in Richfield, $50,000 of community development block grant funding has been allocated to the Housing and Redevelopment Authority for a first-time homebuyer down payment assistance program administered by HRA staff. This is a pilot program aimed at low and moderate income Richfield renters who want to buy homes in Richfield. It will provide no interest deferred loans of up to $10,000 to use towards down payment and closing costs. The loans will be forgiven on a prorated basis over a 10-year period. Income limits and other eligibility requirements will apply. HRA staff has met with several community stakeholders and partners during the development of the program, including representatives from Minnesota Housing, to determine how to market the program in a way that will reach underserved populations in Richfield and to ensure that applicants are financially ready for home ownership. One requirement of the program is that applicants must complete a first-time homebuyer education course. HRA staff has identified 3 local organizations offering these courses, as well as financial readiness counseling, to which applicants can be referred. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the guidelines or the program.
Are there questions or comments?
Comment and a question. First, when we first talked about using CDBG grants this way, it was very exciting. I think this is a really excellent opportunity. You know, we've spent a lot of time discussing affordable housing as it relates to multi-unit, but this is a really big piece of affordable housing as well, especially when we talk about really moving forward with equity work and doing all we can to help folks become first-time home buyers, especially when you look at sort of the gaps in equity we have in home ownership. So this is excellent news. I'm really excited about it. My question is related to the marketing piece of it, and I was looking a little bit kind of what we lay out generally, the plan there, but that seems to be kind of maybe the biggest challenge. And I remember in having conversations with folks from the Minnesota Housing Finance Authority that engaged in some of this work in Bloomington, they talked about some successes and some failures in terms of their effort to market this and make sure that people are aware of the option. So just want to ask about that, and you know, what are some of the best practices and things that we can really be doing to connect community members so that they know that this is an option.
All right, go ahead.
So one of the things we'll be doing moving forward with Minnesota Housing specifically is a campaign that really targets renters in Richfield. They have an amazing ability to kind of hone in on Richfield renters who earn enough to pursue homeownership and who are paying rents that would be similar to a mortgage payment. And so once they have that kind of universe of the population in Richfield, they'll be doing some really targeted mailing that promotes our program as well as their own programs. And people can get up to $25,000 towards down payment assistance. So we're talking about a 4-piece mailing kind of series this fall, in addition to maybe some events, a hotline that would come to the housing specialists in Richfield, as well as other kind of press and media related outreach.
That's fantastic.
Excuse me, Chair, members of the HRA, I just wanted to add the other thing that they're doing is they have a script that they can provide to us so that when we get calls, we can walk people through sort of where they're at and which product would be most appropriate for them. And so that's something that they've developed with others, and then they're also going to have an online tool that we can use. So it's really exciting to be able to take advantage of work they've done in Bloomington and other places, and then they'll further develop and then share in other communities.
So, did you have more to say, or otherwise I have a couple comments? I wanted to add on to what Commissioner Howard was speaking of with the equity issues. Recently, Executive Director Devitt shared a memo with the HRA and I believe the City Council on June 28th. The Bloomington Public Health conducted a health equity data analysis for the City of Richfield, and the document was approved by the Advisory Board of Health on May 21st. And one of the findings in their executive summary, I'm going to quote, it said that in 2014, Richfield had the largest ownership gap between whites and people of color in Minnesota. 77% of whites own their home, while only 29% of people of color are homeowners. So we clearly have a challenge in front of us, and I think that it's really good that we have this policy, these guidelines that we're putting together, because that starts to address that gap in the home ownership, and it's a productive step in the right direction if we have these program guidelines to try and have more first-time home buyers get the down payment assistance. So I think that that's something that is a step in the right direction. I felt really strongly that that information was really important, so I did ask staff to post it. So the report, if you go onto the city website under the HRA minutes and agendas, it does have that entire 100-page report in there. And I think it's well worth, even if people just read the 6 to 8 pages of the executive summary. The second comment that I really liked about this process that was outlined here for the down payment assistance program is it has a lot of stuff done ahead of time, so it doesn't put some roadblocks in front of somebody when they're trying to be competitive and go for a house. This is a very tight housing market, and people get into bidding wars and things like that. And I noticed when I looked at the process that it has everything set up in the pre-approvals ahead of time, so it's not going to put somebody at a competitive disadvantage if they're going for a house. So I thought that was very well thought out, and I was appreciative of that as well. And then finally, I had a question. It talks about that if there were more people applying for the funding than if then there are funds available, that you would start to prioritize things. And one of the things you mentioned is you might prioritize targeted developments. Could you explain that, please? Like, is it like, what does that exactly mean?
Sorry, I was trying to find the right spot here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have said the page number. It is,
We have kids at home, participants, applicants with dependents, people who've lived in Richfield longer than 6 months, someone with employment in Richfield, and someone who's never owned a home versus having owned a home 3 years ago.
and those all made sense to me. And then I believe it said something about that it would prioritize targeted developments, and I may be mistaken.
Yeah, it could be, oh yeah, it's at the end, targeted funding. If there was a case where, for instance, at 6800 Portland, the city is putting money into rehabbing that unit, and it would be sold to the land trust. That might be a situation where we'd say we really want to hold this for a Richfield renter, and so we're going to try and hold one of our pilot loans for that specific project.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I just didn't understand what it meant. All right, are there other questions or comments? Again, here, are there any plans for the attorneys to make changes on this?
No, this is the final version.
This
for
is the
approval.
final version. Okay, thank you. All right, did anyone want to go ahead and make the motion, or?
I'll make a motion to approve as written. I'm very excited about this.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? All right, the motion is before us. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the program guidelines. Thank you. All right, moving on to item number 7 is consideration of the authorization of funding and approval of loan documents for the acquisition of property located within the Cedar Point 2 housing development area by NHH Properties, doing business as NHH Companies LLC. Mr. Devich.
Again, thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. I'm going to ask Julie Urban to make this presentation to the HRA.
Thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. So NHH Companies is proposing to construct 218 market rate apartments and up to 80 for-sale affordable townhomes in the Cedar Point 2 redevelopment area. As you know, that's bound by 63rd Street to the north, 65th Street to the south, 16th Avenue to the west, and Richfield Parkway to the east. 11 single-family residential properties remain to be purchased in the townhome portion of the development area. Of these 11 properties, the developer currently has 4 under contract, has made offers on an additional 3, is in the process of scheduling meetings with 2 of the owners, and has yet to receive a response from the final 2 owners. The developer is asking the Housing and Redevelopment Authority to provide up to $630,000 toward the purchase of 3 of the properties that they currently have under contract. In return, the HRA would receive mortgages against the properties. As the development proceeds, the HRA would be paid back for this assistance through tax increment that's generated by the project. In the event the project does not proceed, the developer would deed the 3 properties to the HRA. Just in terms of critical timing issues, part of why we bring this to you ahead of things like the development agreement and the tax increment plan is that they have signed purchase agreements, again, with 4 of the owners, and closing on that first property is scheduled for August 1st. Happened to be an owner who had a senior housing situation that they needed to sign, and so the developer was willing to accommodate their timing. And August 1st means it's coming up soon, and so we needed to address that one. And then we also wanted to, because the next 2 closings would occur early September, in the event that we don't have the development agreement finalized in August, again, wanted to be prepared to follow through on those purchase agreements. If you have any questions?
Are there any questions?
I don't have any questions. I would just like to say that seeing this matter continue to move forward is really exciting. I do have a question for Mr. Seraphin. When did it get to 80 townhomes? I love the idea of 80 affordable townhomes. I'm just trying to figure where you're going to put them. Don't want to put you on the spot, Adam.
No problem. Good evening, Commissioners, staff. My name is Adam Serafin with NHH Properties. Not to go too far back in time, but one of our issues with the entire development was lack of density, which made our per unit cost come up to a point where it essentially didn't make sense financially. So when we went back to the drawing board late last year, early this year, we came to a conclusion that we would be able to get more density. We did a density study internally with our architect and our consultants. Came back that we could get somewhere in the 90 unit range on the site. I scaled it back for a number of different reasons, down to 80, which is still a good amount for that site. And that's essentially how we came to that conclusion. So we felt that it gave us some of the interesting height and spacing that we wanted with the site, and then also allowed us to move forward financially, which was, of course, the big hurdle that we came across a couple years ago when we attempted this the first time.
Well, I want you to know I really appreciate the effort you and the team has put together in getting this accomplished. And I think probably even more important than from your aspect is the fact that the homeowners over there are finally going to get some relief. I know that they've been waiting for a long time to have something solid, and I think it's wonderful that they're going to have the opportunity to sell and move on with their lives. So thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. At this point, we still don't have a motion. If someone would like to make the motion.
At this time, I would move the authorization of funding and approval of loan documents for the acquisition of property located within the Cedar Point 2 housing development area by NHH Properties, DBA NHH Companies, LLC.
Second.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions? So just to clarify, that authorizes the staff to provide up to $630,000 to acquire that?
Correct.
Okay. And again, here it says subject to final approval. Are there more details that are needed? Or is this pretty much in final form?
In this case, these documents do need some final editing, and so we're asking you to authorize Julie Eddington's to have that authority to decide that it's not substantially different from what's in front of you, but might be necessary to make things clearer.
All right. Are there any other questions? Is everyone clear on the motion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the motion. Next, we're moving on to consideration of the adoption of a resolution authorizing an interfund loan in the amount of $730,000 for advance of certain costs in connection with the property located within Tax Increment Financing District 2018-1, otherwise known as the Cedar Point 2 project. Mr. Devich.
Once again, thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. I'm also going to turn this one over to Julie Urban to continue with this project.
Chair Supple and members of the HRA, as Executive Director Devich explained, that this is asking you to authorize an interfund loan, and as we've just discussed, you've authorized us to provide up to $630,000 in acquisition assistance to the developer of the Cedar Point 2 area, and that we would envision being repaid that money through the tax increment. And in order to do that, we need to authorize an interfund loan. And so in addition to the $630,000, we would add an additional $100,000 from the HRA General Fund to pay for administrative costs. We always like to be more generous with that interfund loan amount so that we don't have to come back in the event that something arises that we need to cover. So again, once the district starts generating increment, the loan will be paid back. And at this point, we anticipate in August bringing you those tax increment plans and modifications. So again, under Minnesota statute, the HRA is authorized to advance or loan money from the general fund or any other fund for which such advances may be legally authorized in order to finance qualified costs, in this case, acquisition costs. And in terms of timing, again, the interfund loan must be approved before funds are expended in order to be reimbursed with that tax increment that'll be generated by the project. And our first closing is scheduled for August 1st, so we're asking you to take this action now.
All right, are there any questions, or would someone like to make a motion?
I will move that we adopt a resolution authorizing an interfund loan in the amount of $730,000 for advance of certain costs in connection with the property located within Tax Increment Financing District 2018-1, which is Cedar Point 2 project.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of adopting the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've adopted the resolution. Moving on to item number 9. This is consideration of the adoption of a resolution approving an amended and restated contract for private development with Lindale Gardens LLC for remaining land at the former Lindale Garden Center site. Mr. Devich.
Thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. This different project, I'm going to turn this over and ask Melissa Paleman to make the presentation to the HRA.
Thank you, Mr. Devich. Chair Supple, members of the HRA. The HRA approved a contract for private development with Lindale Gardens LLC on October 17th of 2011. This contract detailed plans for the redevelopment of the 9-acre site, which would include rehabilitation of the former Garden Center building and construction of a multi-story mixed-use building and multifamily housing. That contract was later amended to allow the demolition and new construction in place of the Garden Center. The contract further detailed the HRA's commitment to provide public assistance through tax increment financing to aid in the acquisition and redevelopment of the property. Since 2011, Lake Winds Co-op has been built on the southern half of the property, and the developer has continued to pursue options for construction of multifamily residential housing and retail on the northern half of the site. On June 26th, the City Council approved revised plans that included 4 multifamily buildings comprised of 30 for-sale condominiums, 8 rental townhomes, and 66 apartments, as well as a retail building of approximately 6,000 square feet. HRA staff has worked with HRA legal counsel and our financial consultant, as well as the developer's legal counsel, to modify the existing contract to reflect this revised proposal. Changes contemplated, in addition to the minimum improvements that I've just described, include the addition of a secondary developer who would construct and manage the rental properties. 7 rental units will be reserved for tenants with an income that does not exceed 60% of the area median income. In accordance with the newly adopted HRA policies, the secondary developer must accept tenants who are recipients of Section 8 housing vouchers, and the secondary developer must provide the HRA with at least 90 days notice of sale of the property. As before, the developer has identified a need for public assistance. The public assistance that's identified in this contract includes 2 tax increment notes from the HRA in the amounts of approximately $2.74 million and $1.49 million. That's one for the master developer and one for the secondary developer. The TIF will be distributed pay-as-you-go, meaning the payments will only be made subject to their generation on the property. In addition, the HRA will withhold an additional 10% of the available tax increment to be used to reimburse the HRA's housing fund. The terms of the contract require construction of the condominiums to begin by December 31st, 2019, and to be completed within 24 months. The apartment and rental townhomes must be under construction by that same date and completed within 18 months. The developer is here tonight if you have any questions for her, as well as legal counsel and myself.
All right, are there any comments or questions? All right, Commissioner Breeze Daniels.
I was just saying, I'm excited that this is moving forward. So it's been a long process. It's very exciting.
Commissioner Howard.
Just one comment, given our work session we just had on inclusionary housing, am I correct that in some ways we're seeing what that in practice would look like with this proposal here?
Yes, that's correct. Even though the policies weren't necessarily all in place, we were moving forward with those, assuming that would be the case.
You know, from the HRA's perspective, you have been practicing the policies that were presented to you earlier for about 25 years. So it's just, they're just being written down now finally.
I had a question for the developer, actually. And can you state your name for the record as well?
Good evening. My name is Colleen Carey. I'm the president of the Cornerstone Group.
Cool. Well, first of all, I'm glad that this is moving forward. I just had a question. I know you're putting affordable units in. Are there any of the units going to be accessible? I know you've got elevators in some of the buildings, but will the units be accessible for people with disabilities, or has any discussion been given to that?
Well, the units, all of the buildings will have elevators. In fact, the condo buildings have an abundance of elevators. There are 6 elevators in those for those 30 units. But since we'll be selling these as individual owner occupied, they're not designed specifically to be accessible, but anybody could work with us to create an accessible unit. But the parking level and all of the floors are accessible. And the apartments are also, I believe, meeting the accessibility requirements for the building code, but I don't have any more details.
All right, thank you. That's helpful. And then the other question is, I noticed there was a longer period for construction for the retail. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, I actually just sent out a proposal today to a prospective tenant who might speed things up a bit because they're interested in having some space sooner rather than later. That building is completely driven by market demand. And it's a little different than an apartment building or a condo building where you can get some units rented or pre-sold and get started. So we are waiting for the right combination of tenants for that. We're talking to a number of different retail, restaurant kind of operations because we think that'd be so nice to have down by the amphitheater. But this particular proposal is to an employer, a business that would bring in a number of employees to the Richfield market. So we think that'd be great as well. And that could work in conjunction with the restaurant. So when a tenant comes, we will be happy to get started on it. And if this proposal were accepted, that might look something like early next year.
All right, thank you very much. That was helpful. Are there any other comments or questions?
Thanks for your support and patience.
All right, thank you. Well, then I'll move to adopt a resolution approving an amended and restated contract for private development with Lindale Gardens LLC for the former Lindale Garden Center site. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and second. Any further questions or discussion? All right, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. So next we are moving on to the Executive Director's Report.
Chair, Supple, members of the HRA, I don't have a report other than to say that you can see by the action that we are looking at tonight that, you know, this is kind of the beginning of what we were really looking at and have been working on for so long to get these projects to come together and to happen, and it's pretty darn exciting.
There is one brief update. The Chamberlain will be holding its groundbreaking ceremony on Thursday, this Thursday at 2 o'clock, just essentially south of the Richfield Liquor Store, and all of you are invited.
All right, thank you. All right, HRA discussion items.
I had a question if there's an update on the 6625 Second Avenue project. We got a memo a couple weeks ago. I don't know if it has a name or.
It doesn't, sorry. It's a single-family property.
Yes,
I just heard
yes.
66 and made an assumption. No, since we sent that out, we were waiting to see if you had any feedback, and it's just a matter of, I made contact with our attorney today, and we just been going back and forth a little bit, deciding if they're going to move forward with the quiet title action or not.
Obviously, staff is very sensitive to the issue of a vulnerable adult having had property issues. We have to balance that against the fiduciary responsibility we have to the HRA. What gives us pause in this case is the fact that a second person is named on the title, and that person has not agreed to any solution. And so we really are hesitant to put the HRA at a lot of risk when we don't know if that second person on the title is a willing participant.
There was some discussion with the attorney today that, perhaps if we can get greater assurance from the conservator that they will indeed be able to get that person off the title, that maybe we could reconsider doing the quiet title.
Thank you.
All right, I had one other item. The last meeting, we asked about the library project, and we announced that there was going to be a meeting on July 23rd, and I noticed today on the website that they've postponed that meeting. So that is now, if the architects are going to share their preliminary concepts for the Southdale Library, and I believe, according to what the website said, it's going to be Saturday, September 22nd from 10 to noon. So I just wanted to update that, since we'd encouraged people to attend the one on July 23rd. Any other discussion items?
In regards to that, did you say preliminary architect drawings?
It says architects will share preliminary concepts. That was what was on the website when I looked to find out about the meeting.
Okay, because all I know is when I contacted the city of Edina, I got a large runaround. Bill Neuendorfer handed me off to the assistant city manager, who called and said, oh, they were just concepts, don't worry about it. Although all concepts were nothing like what we saw when we were at the 3 meetings.
I got the same information from the library staff.
Isn't that great?
I wonder if that's perhaps why it's been postponed.
Well, yeah, and I think I will reach out to, I think it's Lisa, I can't remember her last name, to find out what exact concepts are going to be presented. Because if they're going to be the same things, I think we need to show up in strength.
Yeah. I hadn't heard the meeting had been moved, so
Well,
thank
we
you.
can double check, but that's
Yeah.
when I looked up.
I'd heard
There
that
might
it-
be, okay, I was gonna say there might be 2 different meetings, but
What was the date you had, Mary?
Well, I was going to remind people about the meeting on July 23rd, and when I went to the website, it said it had been postponed to Saturday, September 22nd. Now, we can double check that in case I messed it up, but
no, it's okay.
What was the time?
from 10 to noon. So at any rate, people can look into it, whether it's the 23rd of July or the 22nd of September. I do think we should be
And
there.
I'll see if I can get any information, or if we get some idea of what's going to be presented.
All right, cool, thank you. Any other discussion items? All right, then we'll move on to claims and payroll.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the claims and payroll. Are there any questions? All in favor of approving claims and payroll, please say aye. All opposed? All right, we've approved claims and payroll. Seeing no further business before us, we will adjourn the meeting.